In France and Germany, planned or inspired by so-called Islamic State. Today, an 84-year-old Catholic priest was murdered in church during morning mass. Two men armed with knives stormed into the church in the northern city of Rouen and took several people hostage. A nun who escaped says the attackers forced the priest to kneel and then filmed his death. Well, the attackers were eventually shot dead by police. Lucy Williamson reports from Rouen.
This scene has become France's shorthand for horror. Today, the sirens were sounding for the dead and wounded of St Etienne's church, for an elderly priest and a handful of nuns and worshippers, knifed during their morning service by two men claiming to wage their version of a holy war. Father Jacques Hamel was executed in this quiet local church. Reports say his throat was cut. He was 84 years old. His attackers shot dead by police as they stepped outside the church door. Jean-Claude had known Father Jacques for years. This was a peaceful town, he says, too small to be a target. We thought we were safe here.
I knew the priest personally. The nuns were my neighbours, and they would have lunch together next door. They were humble people. The priest was a good man, calm and friendly.
Today, the line between president and public was thin. But this was an act designed to start a war, create division. An act the president linked to so-called Islamic State, also known as Daesh.
The threat remains high, very high. This is what we've lived through over the past few days, even the past few years. Daesh has declared war against us. We must face up to this war, by all means, whilst respecting the rule of law.
The far-right leader, Marine Le Pen, has described it as another horror carried out by Islamist terrorists. Less than 2 weeks after its last attack here, France is again faced with the problem of how to confront its jihadist threat. Police have raided a nearby flat amid reports that one of the attackers was a local man who may have been wearing an electronic tag after trying to travel to Syria. But this is a national battle for the things France values most: its freedoms, its lifestyle, its identity. Each time, France argues a little more over the cause of this menace and how to beat it. And each time, it happens again. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, St Etienne de Rouvray.
Well, with me now is Frederick Ishbek-Baum, Intelligence and Security Analyst at King's College London. Just to let you know, President Hollande has just been speaking, and he just said that the threat from Islamic militants has never been so great in France. Obviously, he has said before, this is a war. France is just not equipped to fight a war with the enemy in its midst, is it? With so many new migrants who have been welcomed into Europe by Angela Merkel, nobody knows who they are.
Well, the migration and refugee issue is certainly flaring up again in the whole discussion. The thing is that now we know that one of the attackers from today happen to be known to the security services. Now, occasional failure is something quite natural, sadly. So people slipping through the net of security is something we cannot avoid.
But we have no idea who all the people that came into Europe. I know some of these attacks have not been committed by new arrivals, but the fact is people are going to be incredibly fearful and scared. And the rise of right-wing politics, we've seen it already, it's inevitable, isn't it, if the authorities have got no answer, because these attacks are coming daily.
Yes, indeed. I fear that we will see a shift to the right, obviously, stemming from the public fear, as you say.
Do you think, though, that the fact that each new attack, it's still obviously that the horror is so bleak that in a way that there is a risk of contagion? We've seen, 4 attacks in 2 weeks. What about that? The fear of the copycat, the fact that the media inevitably have to report this?
Yes, this is clearly something we can observe. We can observe 3 things, I believe. The first is the individuals who clearly have a well-established link with Islamic State. So there are people behind these attackers. Then you can see the lone wolves as we all know. And then also there are the typical copycats. So the issue I see here is that if someone, for example, who has no IS background, they can, before, during, or shortly after the attack, most of the time shortly before they die, they can just declare that this happened to be in the name of IS. And this is what makes us deal with the attack as a...
What are the responses that you're hearing about? I mean, Germany is talking about some change now, isn't it?
Well, there has to be some change in modus operandi as to how the intelligence and security service operate. But again, as I said in the beginning, occasional failure, I wouldn't want to call it failure really, but occasional attacks that do happen are something quite normal.
What about the talk of potential conscription though in Germany and National Guard and so on?
Well, in Germany right now, conscription is suspended as by the constitution. I haven't heard anything about reenacting it yet, but people are talking about establishing something like the National Guard. These talks have happened in Berlin today. So we'll see where things go. I fear, as said before, that there will be a shift to the right, which is...
Do you think, very briefly, that the media is playing a part in this, though?
Yes.
In what way? And should we be doing something different?
Terrorism needs publicity. Without publicity, without the media, terrorism fails to achieve its goal. So the best thing would be to cut off every media from them. But that's, of course, something we can't do.
We'll have to do it there. Frederick Ishbam, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Now, in the United States, Hillary Clinton is due to be formally nominated in just a few hours' time by the Democratic Party to be the first woman presidential candidate. Well, the traditional roll call of delegates could get feisty tonight unless Bernie Sanders has been persuaded to effectively bypass all that. And hoping to build on the unifying speech by Michelle Obama last night, this evening appearing at the convention for the first time as a political spouse, the former president, Bill Clinton. Well, Nick Bryant is in Philadelphia for us. Nick, it's extraordinary. I first saw Bill Clinton speak in the immediate aftermath of the Monica Lewinsky scandal, when his wife, of course, had been globally humiliated. And here he is, coming to draw attention and proclaim his wife as a potential future leader.
Geeta, I covered that in Washington as well, and what ages me the most is I wrote my first Bill Clinton story almost 25 years ago, so I'm feeling a bit of a veteran tonight here in Philadelphia as we see Bill. I think we're seeing a different kind of Bill Clinton in this campaign. Yeah, he doesn't quite have the energy, perhaps not the same magnetism, perhaps not the same sort of overpowering charisma that he has had in previous years. He made a remarkable speech in 2012 on behalf of Barack Obama in Charlotte, North Carolina, where the Democrats last met. Can he do the same tonight? Big question. And can he repeat the success last night of Michelle Obama, talking about charisma, talking about magnetism? She really did deliver an electrifying speech last night, as you can hear now.
In this election, and every election, is about who will have the power to shape our children for the next 4 or 8 years of their lives. And I am here tonight because in this election, there is only one person who I trust with that responsibility. Only one person who I believe is truly qualified to be President of the United States, and that is our friend Hillary Clinton.
Some speech. Well, joining me here in Philadelphia is a longtime Hillary Clinton supporter, worked in the Bill Clinton White House on the National Security Council and also in Hillary Clinton's State Department. Daniel Feldman, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
When you heard those boos yesterday, as a longtime fan of Hillary Clinton, how did it make you feel?
Well, I think the most important thing to note is that we saw last night just a remarkable experience where I think the perception that this is a party that is not unified at this point is way overblown. We saw over the course of the evening those boos being minimized to the point where you didn't hear them at all anymore. And most importantly, you saw lay out such a stark difference between the optimism of what Democrats were laying out together and unified compared to the very frightening philosophy that Donald Trump and his supporters have laid out.
A lot of Bernie Sanders supporters here clearly hate Hillary Clinton. Not that they dislike her, they hate her. And her public persona You know, a lot of people in the country at large don't like her either. Now, how does her public persona differ from the Hillary Clinton that you know, and why is she having so much difficulty with this kind of likability issue?
Well, I think first of all, this is a person that has endured just a barrage of attacks for 25 years. But my experience with her is, and those of virtually anybody that has worked with her, is one that is just overwhelmingly positive. And the reason that we are all such passionate supporters of her, not only are we so frightened by what the prospect of a Trump presidency may look like, but we truly believe in this Hillary Clinton. The one that I know is extremely thoughtful, is a listener, is very analytic, is rigorous, is warm, is funny, writes to my young daughters when they send her a Christmas card, and they now believe, as Michelle Obama said last night, that they can do anything, that brings back a teddy bear from Afghanistan for them at some point, and one that I just trust her judgment and her analysis, and I think that she would make a wonderful president. We've never seen a candidate this prepared before.
So when you look at Hillary Clinton on the political stage, do you see a different person than the Hillary Clinton you see behind closed doors than on the diplomatic stage?
Well, we certainly saw it on the diplomatic stage, where her favorabilities were extremely high, both in the U.S. and certainly internationally, by the time she left office. She reintroduced America to the rest of the world at that point extremely successfully, built very, very strong relationships in the U.K., in Europe and elsewhere, and demonstrated this belief in partnership and doing these things together, not only domestically, but in our international partnerships, as we saw in Afghanistan, which I was responsible for, and with the very, very strong and important support of the British and others. So I see someone that I believe in, and I know has the experience and the judgment to be a remarkable president.
Daniel Feldman, we will see how many people agree with you at the end of this convention and indeed at the end of this election. Many thanks. And with that, we hand you back to London.
In for another fun few hours, Nick. Thanks very much. Well, later today at that convention, we will also be hearing from the mothers of Eric Garner and Michael Brown. They were two black men whose deaths at the hands of police sparked the Black Lives Matter protests. And that whole question, all the tensions linked to race in the US, have alarmed so many people across the country. Singer Michelle Williams has sold millions of records right around the world, and as part of the American group Destiny's Child in the 1990s and early 2000s. Well, more recently, she's also been talking about those race tensions in the US as a spate of shootings involving black men and police officers have continued. The BBC caught up with her on a trip to the UK and asked her how she reacted to the recent series of shootings.
My reaction is still shock, hurt, questions. What were they thinking? The fear. And how the other person, did you know that they were scared for their life? They don't know what's going on. And then you just shoot them because you have a gun in your hand and your hand's on the trigger and you think that that's your only choice. Now, I don't know what goes on in the police academy, and I thank the amazing good police and authority that there is. Because there's more good, I believe, than there is more bad. Are you trained to get your gun first, or are you trained to subdue and try to calm down the situation?
Get on your knees.
Even just the other day, a man in Miami, I don't know if you saw, he's lying on the ground, his hands are actually up. He's saying, I don't have a gun. This young boy, he's my patient. And you still shot him. So it's like, man, when you're doing right, you still might get shot. That's scary. And now to think that every time a black man goes out of his house, he has to worry, what is he gonna encounter today that might not end so well? It's wrong. Taking a life, what, because you're angry, you don't like them, you think, I'm gonna take justice into my own hands. It's wrong. Either way, somebody got a phone call saying, can you come identify this body? No matter how you slice it, it's all wrong, it's wrong.
Order!
Hey! Uniting with people different from you. Actually being hands-on with people that are different from you always helps so that you can know. Getting out there, get in the hood.
Singer Michelle Williams speaking to the BBC. Police in Japan are questioning a 26-year-old man about the country's worst mass killing in generations. He's suspected of stabbing 19 people to death at a residential care home near Tokyo, where he worked until February this year. Many more were injured. John Sudworth reports.
This CCTV footage from outside the care home is thought to capture the moment late last night that the killer arrived, carrying a bag of knives. This morning, forensic teams began piecing together the elements of a crime that is beyond imagination. And Japan is a country in profound shock. In room after room, the victims were found with their throats cut. Many had serious mental disabilities. The oldest of those killed was aged 70, the youngest just 19. Shortly afterwards, a former employee at the care home, 26-year-old Satoshi Uematsu, seen here in a Facebook photo, claimed he was responsible.
This wasn't an impulsive crime where the suspect just blew up and grabbed a knife. He went in the dead of night, opened one door at a time and stabbed sleeping people one at a time.
It took less than an hour. Again, this footage is said to match the timings, and shortly afterwards, the alleged killer handed himself in at a local police station. There were plenty of warning signs. Uematsu had begun to publicly express his disturbing view that disabled people unable to live independent lives should be killed. And in February this year, his employment here came to an end after he wrote to the National Parliament. The letter, pictures of which have been broadcast today, was enough to prompt the authorities to act, and Uematsu was detained in a psychiatric hospital. But just 2 weeks later, he was released, returning to live in this house a short distance from the care home.
When I walked there, the staff and tenants were like friends. I just can't imagine this happening.
Amid the grief, the debate is already turning to whether more could have been done to prevent it. John Sudworth, BBC News in Sagamihara near Tokyo.
Let's look at some of the day's other news. And there have been 2 car bomb attacks at the main entrance to the airport in the Somali capital, Mogadishu. Bursts of gunfire have been heard at the scene. At least 12 people are believed to be dead, many of them UN security guards. The Islamist group Al-Shabaab says that it carried out the attack. The president of South Sudan, Salva Kiir, has sacked his long-standing rival, the opposition leader Riek Machar, and replaced him as first vice president with General Taban Dengai, the former mining minister. Mr. Machar fled the capital, Juba, earlier this month after fighting between his forces and troops loyal to the president left hundreds dead. The Bangladeshi Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina says a swift operation against suspected Islamist militants has saved the country from what she called a terrible situation. Her comments came after police said they killed 9 Islamists at their hideout in the capital, Dhaka. Another militant was arrested. It isn't yet clear which group the men belong to. From the capital, Anbarasan Ethirajan.
It's hard to imagine that suspected Islamists were living in a quiet residential area like this one here in Dhaka. The lanes are very narrow. It is hard for the police officers to bring in vehicles through these lanes to launch an operation. They say they started this operation earlier in the morning after getting a tip-off. The militants were living on the 5th floor of an apartment at the end of this road. And the fighting started as and when one of the gunmen threw a bomb on the police officers. Residents here talk about several hours of gunfight between the two sides. 9 Islamist militants have been killed. 1 was wounded and captured. Bangladesh has been on high alert since the attack on a cafe in Dhaka earlier this month, in which more than 20 people were killed, most of them foreigners. Police here suspect that dozens of young men could have been radicalized and they could be living in a residential areas like this one here in Dhaka and also in other parts of the country. Anbarasan Ethirajan, BBC News, Dhaka.
The celebrated Egyptian film director Mohammed Khan has died at the age of 73 after a prolific career. Khan had been one of Egypt's best-known filmmakers since the 1980s, making a string of movies tackling social issues. Suma Dagestani looks back at his life and career.
Acclaimed by the critics and the public alike, Khan was one of Egypt's leading cinematic figures for nearly half a century. A British national born to an Egyptian mother and a Pakistani father in Cairo in 1942, his directing career began in the 70s. He was one of the founders of Egypt's neo-realism cinema movement. He led the way in taking the cameras out of the studio, shooting most of his films on the streets of the Egyptian capital. His 24 films always focused on the lives of ordinary working-class Egyptians. In many of them, he portrayed the hardships faced by women. One of his most memorable films, The Wife of an Important Man, made in 1987, Khan tells the story of a woman married to a brutal police officer involved in the repression of opponents of al-Sadat government. Despite being widely celebrated as a great figure in Egyptian and Arab cinema, Egypt only granted Khan nationality in 2014 after a presidential decree. His death has left Egyptian cinema bereft of one of its biggest names and an exquisite storyteller. Somer Dagestani, BBC News.
Now, the first solar-powered round-the-world flight has been completed. The Solar Impulse 2 aircraft has flown 26,000 miles using only the power of the sun. It landed in Abu Dhabi in the early hours of this morning at the end of its historic 16-month journey. Just to warn you, there is some flash photography in this report by Amy Cole.
Arriving to great fanfare, the smooth and controlled touchdown bringing an end to what's been a remarkable and record-breaking journey. Solar Impulse 2 is the brainchild of Bertrand Piccard, who was piloting the plane for the final time.
Everything is possible. Why don't we dream more? Why don't we try more? And when I touched my wheels here, I thought, okay, it's a start.
The aircraft has the wingspan of a jumbo jet, but the weight of a family car. Using the sun's rays, it's powered by 17,000 solar cells peppered all over the wings, which drive 4 electric motors. Its mission? To promote renewable energy. The aircraft set off from Abu Dhabi on the 9th of March last year, heading for the Persian Gulf, then across India, China, America, and lastly Europe, before returning to the Emirates this morning. The fifth leg of its journey from Burma to China was deemed to be one of the trickiest by the pilot and his compatriot André Borschberg because of the mountainous terrain.
Today it's the flight to China, Chongqing. If everything goes well, André will continue tomorrow morning with Solar Impulse to bring it to Nanjing.
For the team behind this wonder plane, a chance now to reflect and consider that maybe one day in the not-so-distant future, passenger planes could become a lot greener and cleaner. Amy Cole, BBC News.
Now, from soaring in the skies, just one last tall story, because when it comes to height, it seems Dutch men tower over everyone else. New research shows that the average Dutchman is now 183 centimetres tall, but to find the tallest women, you need to go a little further east in Europe and go to Latvia. There, women on average are 170 centimetres tall, while the research published in the journal eLife has tracked growth trends in 187 countries since 1940. I wonder if there is a secret as someone who is somewhat vertically challenged. I am on Twitter. If you know the secret to having tall children at least, let me know. See you soon.